I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was simply arriving early for our appointment with Alessandra Vega, the high-end wedding planner. My daughter Penny had insisted on hiring. My arms were full of carefully organized folders. Venue options, floral arrangements, menu suggestions, the result of countless hours of research I'd done to help create Penny's perfect day. As I approached Alessandra's office door, I heard my daughter's voice clear and dismissive through the half-open doorway. "Mom's too old-fashioned for our wedding," Penny was saying with a laugh I didn't recognize, a brittle, sophisticated sound unlike her usual warm giggle. "We need something modern and Instagram-worthy, not some afternoon tea party with doilies like she keeps suggesting." I froze, the folders suddenly heavy in my arms. "Don't worry," Alessandra replied, her voice smooth and conspiratorial. "We'll do it your way. She won't know the details until it's too late to change anything." "Perfect," my daughter replied. "She's just writing the checks anyway, as long as we keep her focused on the budget spreadsheets. We can handle the actual planning." The folders slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, scattering papers across the polished hardwood floor of the hallway. The sound alerted them to my presence, and when I bent to gather my research, Penny appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting quickly from annoyance to forced brightness. "Mom, you're early." She glanced at the papers strewn across the floor. "Oh, you didn't need to bring all that. Allie and I have everything under control." I straightened, clutching the disorganized pile of papers to my chest. I'm not sure what my face revealed, but something made Penny's smile falter. "Is everything okay?" she asked, a hint of wariness in her voice. I managed a tight smile. "Everything's fine." I lied as my heart cracked in my chest, but I just remembered an urgent call I need to make. "Let's reschedule." Before either of them could respond, I turned and walked away, leaving behind not just the scattered papers, but also my illusions about my role in my only daughter's wedding, a wedding for which I was paying every single penny of the $175,000 budget. My name is Jacqueline Montgomery, though everyone calls me Jackie. At 58, I run a successful interior design firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, a business I built from scratch after my husband, Richard Montgomery, died from pancreatic cancer 8 years ago. Richard had been my high school sweetheart, my best friend, my partner in everything. We married young, had Penny when I was 31, and built a life centered around our small family. Richard worked as an architect, while I initially stayed home with Penny. When she started school, I began taking design clients, mostly friends and neighbors at first. As Penny grew, so did my business, eventually becoming Montgomery Designs, now one of Charlotte's premier interior design firms. When Richard was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, our world collapsed. He fought hard for 18 months, but the disease was merciless. Throughout it all, Penny, then 19 and in her sophomore year of college, struggled to cope. She and Richard had always been exceptionally close, sharing a love of architecture design and classic films. His death left a void in both our lives that nothing could fill. In my grief, I threw myself into two things: my business and supporting Penny. I paid for her to finish her degree in communications, funded her unpaid internships, helped with the down payment on her first condo, and celebrated every milestone as I knew Richard would have wanted. Perhaps I overcompensated, trying to be both parents afraid of losing her too. Perhaps I gave too much, asked for too little in return. Now Penny was 27, a successful digital media strategist, engaged to Dominic Russo, a 29-year-old tech executive from a warm Italian-American family. The Russos had welcomed me immediately, with Isabella and Marco, often inviting me for Sunday dinners that reminded me of the family gatherings Richard and I used to host. When Penny and Dominic announced their engagement, I was overjoyed. I immediately offered to pay for the wedding, a tradition Richard would have insisted upon. What I hadn't expected was how quickly I would be sidelined in the planning process, valued only for my checkbook, not my input or experience. And I certainly never expected to hear my own daughter dismiss me as old-fashioned and irrelevant to the wedding I was financing entirely. I drove home in a daze, the conversation replaying in my mind. Old-fashioned. Writing checks. Won't know until it's too late. Once inside my tastefully designed craftsman-style home, the last project Richard and I had worked on together, before his diagnosis, I sat at my home office desk and stared at the wedding planning binder I'd created. It was organized with the same attention to detail I brought to my design projects. Budget breakdowns, vendor comparisons, timeline schedules. Each section was color-coded and annotated with my thoughts and suggestions. Suggestions that apparently were considered embarrassingly outdated by my daughter and her wedding planner. I opened my laptop and found myself scrolling through Penny's social media accounts, seeing her world through new eyes. Her Instagram was curated to perfection, each photo filtered and staged for maximum impact. Her Pinterest boards for the wedding were filled with trendy minimalist designs, geometric backdrops, neon signs, and unconventional color schemes that bore little resemblance to the elegant, timeless affair I had envisioned. And then I founded a private board she'd accidentally shared with me months ago and probably forgotten about. It was titled, Wedding Ideas Mom Cannot See, and it contained everything she actually wanted. A champagne wall aerial performers during the reception, a 7-tier cake with edible gold leaf custom cocktails named after their pets. The estimated costs in the descriptions exceeded our agreed budget by nearly $50,000. I felt sick. Not just at the deception, but at the realization that I didn't know my daughter anymore. When had Penny, who once made Richard and me handmade anniversary cards and insisted we dance in the living room to his favorite jazz records, become someone who would mock and manipulate her mother? My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Regina Hamilton, my oldest friend and the person who had helped me survive Richard's illness and death. "How'd the meeting go?" she asked without preamble. Regina never wasted time on unnecessary pleasantries. One of the many reasons I valued her friendship, it didn't, I replied, and found myself spilling the whole story, the overheard conversation, the secret Pinterest board, the growing realization that I was nothing more than an ATM in my daughter's wedding plans. Regina's silence when I finished was telling. She had never been Penny's biggest fan, often suggesting that I enabled my daughter's increasingly entitled behavior. I had always defended Penny, citing her grief over Richard and her need for stability. "Jackie," Regina finally said, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. What would Richard say if he could see this situation? The question hit me like a physical blow. Richard had been kind but firm, especially about matters of respect and integrity. He'd often said that true love meant teaching our daughter values, not indulging her every whim. He'd be disappointed. I admitted, tears finally coming. In both of us, Penny, for her behavior and me for allowing it. "Then there's your answer," Regina said simply. "Richard didn't raise his daughter to treat people this way, especially not her mother, and he certainly didn't marry a woman who would just roll over and become a human checkbook." After we hung up, I sat looking at a photo of Richard on my desk. It was taken on our 25th anniversary, just months before his diagnosis. His smile was so confident, his eyes full of the quiet dignity that had defined him. "What would you do, Richard?" I whispered to the photograph. The answer came not in a supernatural whisper, but in the memory of something he'd often told me during difficult client situations. "Jackie, you can be kind without being a doormat. Remember, you have to respect yourself before others will respect you." With sudden clarity, I knew what I needed to do. I opened my email and composed a brief message to both Penny and Alessandra. "We need to meet tomorrow at my office, 10 a.m. The wedding budget requires immediate discussion. This is non-negotiable, Jackie Montgomery." I pressed send before I could second-guess myself, then took a deep breath. For the first time since overhearing that devastating conversation, I felt something other than hurt. I felt resolve. The next morning, I prepared for the meeting with the same precision I brought to client presentations. I wore a cream St. John's suit that projected both elegance and authority, pulled my silver-streaked dark hair into a sleek chignon, and arranged my office for maximum impact, placing myself at the head of the conference table, rather than my usual spot on the side. I laid out 3 identical folders containing detailed spreadsheets of all wedding expenses to date, copies of contracts, and a new proposed budget. I also placed a digital recorder in plain view on the table. Charlotte was a one-party consent state for recordings, and I wanted there to be no ambiguity about my intentions. My assistant showed Penny and Alessandra in precisely at 10. Penny looked apprehensive, dressed in the casual chic style she favored for work, while Alessandra projected professional confidence in an impeccably tailored pantsuit, her tablet and planner clutched to her chest. "Good morning," I said, gesturing to the chairs across from me. "Thank you for accommodating this meeting on short notice." "Mom, what's this about?" Penny asked, eyeing the folders nervously. "We have a cake tasting at 11:30. "This won't take long," I replied, sliding a folder to each of them. "Please open to the first page." They complied, Alessandra maintaining her professional demeanor while Penny's brow furrowed in confusion at the document titled Wedding Budget Reconciliation and Terms. "As you know," I began, "I committed to funding Penny and Dominic's wedding with a budget of $175,000. To date, $42. $500 has been spent on deposits for the venue, catering, and your services. Ms. Vega." Alessandra nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "What you may not know," I continued, "is that as the financial sponsor of this event, I have certain expectations regarding my involvement and how my contribution is acknowledged." Penny's head snapped up. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "I'm talking about respect, Penny," I said evenly. "I accidentally overheard your conversation with Miss Vega yesterday. I also discovered your secret Pinterest board with plans that significantly exceed our agreed budget." Penny's face drained of color, while Alessandra maintained her professional mask, though her knuckles whitened around her tablet. "Furthermore," I continued, "I've reviewed the email correspondence between you both, which I have access to since my email is listed as the billing contact on all vendor contracts. I found numerous exchanges discussing how to circumvent my input while maintaining my financial support." "Mom, it wasn't like that," Penny began, but I held up a hand. "Please turn to page 3. I instructed, you'll find 2 options moving forward." They both flipped to the page as directed. Option 1. The wedding proceeds with my financial backing, but with significant changes. I will have final approval on all decisions. Ms. Vega will report directly to me on all matters, copying Penny on communications. The overall aesthetic will reflect a compromise between traditional elements I value and modern touches Penny prefers. The budget remains at $175,000 with no overages. I paused, making eye contact with each of them before continuing. Option 2. I withdraw my financial support entirely. The deposits paid to date will be my wedding gift to you. Penny, you and Dominic can plan whatever wedding you desire on your own budget, with no input from me required. I will attend as a guest. The silence that followed was deafening. Penny looked stunned while Alessandra's professional veneer finally cracked, showing genuine alarm at the prospect of losing such a lucrative client. "You can't be serious," Penny finally whispered. "I've never been more serious," I replied. "Richard taught me the importance of standing up for myself even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." At the mention of her father, Penny's eyes filled with tears. "This isn't fair. It's my wedding." "Yes, it is your wedding," I agreed, "but it's my money. Money I earned building my business while grieving your father and supporting you through college and beyond. Money I've worked hard for and am happy to spend on your behalf, but not at the cost of my dignity." Before Penny could respond, there was a knock at my office door. My assistant opened it to reveal Isabella and Marco Russo, Dominic's parents, along with Dominic himself. Perfect timing, I said, rising to greet them. "Thank you for coming." Penny gaped in shock. "What are they doing here?" I invited them. I explained, this concerns their family too. The Russos entered with Isabella immediately coming to embrace me. At 57, she was a stylish, warm-hearted woman who had made me feel welcome from our first meeting. Jackie called us last night. Marco explained to his visibly confused son. She shared some concerns about the wedding planning that we found troubling. I don't understand what's happening, Dominic said, looking between his parents and his fiancée. I gestured for everyone to sit, adding 3 more folders to the table for our new arrivals. Quickly but thoroughly, I outlined the situation, the overheard conversation, the secret plans, the budget discrepancies. I was careful to focus on facts rather than emotions, treating this like the business meeting. It essentially was. When I finished, Dominic turned to Penny with an expression of dismay. Is this true? You've been planning all this behind Jackie's back. Behind my back too, apparently. Penny's face crumpled. It got out of control, she admitted. Margot and the other bridesmaids kept showing me these amazing weddings on Instagram, and Allie said we could make it happen if we just worked around Mom's traditional ideas. Alessandra straightened defensively. I was simply trying to help Penny achieve her vision while working within the constraints. The constraint being me, I clarified, the person paying for everything. Isabella Russo's expression had grown increasingly troubled throughout the exchange. She turned to Penny with the same direct gaze I'd seen her use on Dominic when he stepped out of line. Penelope, she said firmly, in our family we have a saying, chi paga lo scotto, comanda la festa. The one who pays the bill gives the orders. Your mother isn't just providing a gift, she's honoring you with her hard work and sacrifice. Where is your gratitude? Penny flushed deeply, unable to meet Isabella's eyes or mine. Marco nodded in agreement with his wife. When we married, we had nothing. Isabella's mother made her dress. My cousins cooked the food. We danced in my parents' backyard. But there was love and respect. Those are the foundations, not champagne walls or whatever these trends are now. Dominic, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. Penny, can we talk privately for a minute? She nodded mutely and they stepped outside my office, closing the door behind them. In their absence, Alessandra attempted damage control. Mrs. Montgomery, I want to apologize for any misunderstanding. My role is to facilitate the bride's vision while respecting the budget parameters. Your role, I corrected her, was to provide professional guidance to both the bride and the person paying for your services. Instead, you encouraged deception and disrespect. Isabella made a sound of agreement. In the old country, a wedding planner who behaved this way would never work again. I think, sir, I continued, we should discuss the terms of your withdrawal from this project and the partial refund of your retainer. Alessandra blanched. That won't be necessary. I'm sure we can find a way forward that satisfies everyone. That remains to be seen, I replied. When Penny and Dominic returned 10 minutes later, both had obviously been crying. Dominic's arm was protectively around Penny's shoulders, but his expression was resolute. Jackie, he began, I want to apologize. I had no idea about any of this. I thought we were all working together on the wedding plans. Penny stepped forward, her face tear-streaked but composed. Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't even recognize the person I've become these past few months. Dad would be so disappointed in me. The mention of Richard this time from Penny's lips sent a pang through my heart. When Margot and the others started showing me all these extravagant weddings, she continued, I got caught up in competing with them. I convinced myself that you wouldn't understand, because you're from a different generation. But that was just an excuse to be selfish and disrespectful. She took a shaky breath. The truth is, I've been trying so hard to plan this perfect wedding that I forgot what marriage actually means. Dad would have hated what I've been doing. I felt my carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. Your father valued integrity above all else. He believed that how we treat people, especially those who love us, defines who we are. I know, Penny whispered, and I failed miserably at that. Dominic squeezed her shoulders supportively. We've talked, and we'd like to start over with the wedding planning and with how we approach this whole process, if you're willing to give us another chance. Isabella and Marco exchanged glances of approval while Alessandra remained wisely silent. I considered my daughter carefully. The hurt was still fresh, but beneath my pain, I recognized something in her expression. Genuine remorse and a glimmer of the thoughtful girl she had been. Before grief and social media had reshaped her priorities. I think, I said finally, that we need to reestablish some fundamental understandings. This isn't about whether napkins are folded in swans or geometric shapes. It's about respect and honesty between us. I want to fix this, Penny said earnestly. Please let me try. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Alessandra Vega was replaced with a wedding planner who specialized in blending traditional and contemporary elements, an older woman named Gloria, who treated both Penny's vision and my input with equal respect. Penny and I had several long, sometimes painful conversations about the patterns that had developed in our relationship since Richard's death. My tendency to indulge her to compensate for her loss, her habit of taking my support for granted. How we had both in different ways lost sight of the values Richard had instilled in our family. I miss him so much, Penny admitted during one tearful discussion. Sometimes I feel like I'm forgetting him, his voice, his laugh, but then I'll do something selfish or thoughtless, and I can almost hear him calling me on it. He would have... I agreed with a sad smile. Your father never tolerated entitlement, not even from the person he loved most in the world. To my surprise, Dominic and his parents became powerful allies in rebuilding my relationship with Penny. The Russos shared stories of their own family conflicts and resolutions, modeling a kind of loving accountability that had been missing from my parenting since Richard's death. You've been mother and father to her, Isabella observed one evening when we were finalizing centerpiece designs. Perhaps now it's time to be just her mother, loving but not always accommodating. The wedding plans evolved into something neither wholly traditional nor aggressively modern, but rather a thoughtful blend that honored both my aesthetic sensibilities and Penny's contemporary vision. The venue remained the elegant oceanfront resort we'd originally booked, but the decor incorporated both classic elements and modern touches. Penny surprised me by asking to include several tributes to Richard. A memory table with his photograph, his favorite jazz band, playing during the cocktail hour, and a father-daughter dance where she would dance with Marco, while a slideshow of Richard played on screens around the ballroom. Do you think it's too sad? She asked anxiously when she proposed the idea. I think it's perfect. I assured her, he deserves to be present on your day. The most profound change, however, wasn't in the wedding plans, but in Penny herself. The artifice and social media obsession gradually gave way to a more authentic approach. She reduced contact with Margot, whose influence had encouraged some of her worst behaviors, and developed a genuine friendship with Dominic's sister Elena, whose values more closely aligned with our families. 2 weeks before the wedding, Penny asked me to join her for lunch at Richard's favorite restaurant, a small Italian place where he'd taken us for special occasions throughout her childhood. I have something for you, she said after we'd ordered. Sliding a small package across the table, inside was a silver locket. When I opened it, I found a tiny photograph of Richard on one side, and on the other the words, "Always with us," engraved in his handwriting. Taken, I realized, with a catch in my throat from a birthday card he'd given me years ago. I want you to wear it at the wedding. Penny explained, her eyes bright with unshed tears. So he's walking with both of us that day. And in that moment, I glimpsed the daughter I'd feared was lost, the sensitive, thoughtful young woman Richard and I had raised before grief and materialism had temporarily led her astray. It's beautiful, I told her honestly. He would be so proud of the woman you've become. She smiled through her tears. Not just of the woman I've become these past few weeks. He'd be proud of the woman you raised me to be, all along. The one who finally remembered what really matters. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with just enough breeze off the ocean to temper the June heat As I helped Penny prepare in the bridal suite surrounded by her bridesmaids and Isabella, I felt Richard's presence more strongly than I had in years. The ceremony struck exactly the right balance. Elegant white florals and classical music that satisfied my traditional tastes, complemented by modern geometric arches and personalized vows that reflected Penny and Dominic's contemporary sensibilities. During the reception, as I watched Penny dance with Marco, while images of Richard filled the screens around the ballroom, Isabella squeezed my hand. "You've given her a beautiful gift," she said softly. "Not just this wedding, but the courage to become her best self again. That kind of loving firmness, it's the hardest part of being a parent." Later, as Penny and Dominic prepared to leave for their honeymoon, my daughter embraced me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "not just for today, but for being brave enough to hold me accountable. I needed that more than another beautiful table setting or expensive centerpiece." As I watched their car drive away, the silver locket warm against my skin, I thought about the journey we'd taken to reach this point. The hurt of that overheard conversation seemed distant. Now, transformed by honest communication and renewed respect, Richard would have handled the situation differently. I was certain, with less initial accommodation and more direct guidance. But perhaps this detour had been necessary for both Penny and me, a painful but important lesson in honoring both his memory and ourselves. In the end, the wedding wasn't about being fashionable or traditional, modern or classic. It was about celebrating love in all its forms. Romantic love between Penny and Dominic, the parental love that had shaped them both, and the enduring love of a man whose values continued to guide us even in his absence. As I drove home that night exhausted but at peace, I found myself talking to Richard, as I often did on important occasions. "You would have loved today," I told him, touching the locket at my throat. "It wasn't perfect, but it was honest and real, just like you always taught us to be." And somewhere in the quiet of my heart, I could almost hear his reply. "That's all I ever wanted for both my girls, the courage to be yourselves and the wisdom to know what truly matters." It had taken an overheard conversation and a painful confrontation to remind us of those lessons. But as with all the most important teachings in life once remembered, they would not be easily forgotten again.